LNWR athletes. F.W. Webb's President class of locomotives made their way into the history books after Hardwicke's astonishing run in the 1895 Race to the North. These athletic locomotives may have been small compared to their 20th century counterparts, but the determination of LNWR footplate crews ensured that they provided passengers with an exhilarating and memorable journey. The London and North Western Railway was a company firmly focused on providing a quality service whilst keeping costs down and profits up. It operated a network with smaller, cheaper engines and lower speed restrictions of 40 miles per hour, resulting in relatively inexpensive fuel consumption. Their methods paid dividends. In order for this equation to work, the LNWR needed engineers with the ability to create light, energy-efficient engines. In John Ramsbottom and his successor Francis Webb, they had just that. Webb's original President proved to be a very sound little machine, putting in quality and, most importantly, reliable work. Maintenance was cheap and often nothing more than procedural, as the engines were solidly built. One of the most notable performances by a President was that of number 955 Charles Dickens. Entrusted with the daily London Euston to Manchester service, number 955 stuck to its task admirably, and after 20 years and 73 days recorded its 2 millionth mile, a quite extraordinary record, and one that still stands as the highest mileage of any British steam locomotive in history. The improved President came about in the late 1880s because Webb's new three-cylinder compounds were not the success that he had planned. Webb's new engines clearly had fewer restraints placed upon them in the design process than his previous 240s, often being seen putting in some astonishing work on the lines. It was their power and speed to size ratio that inevitably led to the nickname Jumbo. The races to the north in 1895 that provided a stage for Webb's Jumbos to really show what they were capable of. Webb's improved President number 790 Hardwicke was handed the task of hauling a load of 70.5 tons from Crewe to Carlisle, taking in the steep climbs to Greyrig and Shap Summit on the way. Averaging 67.3 miles per hour for the journey, Hardwicke covered the 141.5-mile stretch in 126 minutes, becoming the first locomotive to ever travel more than 140 miles at close to a 70-mile-per-hour average. Reports at the time suggested that engine number 790 had even reached 96 miles per hour at one point. By the end of the races, the journey from London to Carlisle had been reduced by 1 hour 15 minutes. Hardwicke's impressive performance ensured the improved President's extra years of service on the lines, with 26 lasting beyond grouping and passing into the hands of the LMS. Mike Lee visited the National Railway Museum, York, to take a closer look at the LNWR's Star of Steam, number 790, Hardwicke.
Here in the National Railway Museum at York, two competitors in the 1895 race from London to Aberdeen confront each other. Patrick Stirling's elegant 8-foot single built for the Great Northern Railway, a member of the East Coast Alliance, and this London North Western engine, Hardwicke, a member of Webb's Precedent class, better known as Jumbos, and it's a very remarkable engine indeed. On the 22nd of August 1895, this engine took part in establishing a record for the journey between Euston and Aberdeen that stood until the high-speed train era. It succeeded in covering the distance from Crewe to Carlisle at an average speed of 67.2 miles an hour, an astonishing feat. Even more surprisingly, it is the most modern, preserved express passenger locomotive from the giant London North Western Railway. The performance of the Jumbos was even more remarkable. They were known regularly to develop horsepowers in excess of 600 in the cylinders, and they achieved 90 miles an hour on many occasions. For a very light 33-ton engine, a very simple construction, those figures were truly astonishing, and they were held in great regard, as the nickname Jumbos shows, because they were said to pull like an elephant and run like a deer. I'm joined now by Ray Towell of the National Railway Museum, and Ray, we better get your title right first, I suppose.
Yes, for many, many years I was curator operations here, but in more modern times I'm rail operations coordinator at the National Railway Museum here in York.
And that involves you being in charge of any of the exhibits which go out on the main line or operate even on heritage railways, I suppose.
That's right, I run as RO with our locomotives.
And you had the amazing privilege, I think I'd call it, of being on this locomotive when it was in service on the national network in preservation.
That's right, 30 years ago at Carnforth. We used to work regularly around from Carnforth to Grange over Sands with 3 or 4 Mark I vehicles, no problem at all.
How did she manage with a load like that?
Absolutely beautiful. She's got a large wheel, a 6'6" wheel I believe, so we had to get them on the go a bit carefully, but as soon as she was bowling along it was absolutely fine.
And of course London North Western men always used to say that you could never run them short of steam. Was that your experience?
She was an extremely free steamer, fire a saucer fire into the corner of each corner of the box and frying in the middle and flying along.
And bearing in mind they achieved sort of speeds of 90 miles an hour with these in the old days, how did it ride?
Those boys were heroes, absolute heroes, because they're very, very lively. She is very, very lively on her springs. You feel as though you're off the road some of the time, but an exhilarating ride.
Can we have a look at the engine and see some of the features that make it so successful? Now the engine's actually got quite an old-fashioned form of valve gear, hasn't it, Ray?
Yes, you've got Allen link motion in there, which is like a sort of a backwards way on Stephenson's really to look at. It's very accessible and very free running gear. Eccentrics the same as Stephenson's got, so you've got to pay attention to that when you're lubricating.
Now looking at the front of the engine, they seem to be very large cylinders and valves. That presumably would account for its power and freeness of running.
Yes, an excellent free running engine. As you can see, the valves are mounted right above the pistons, well accessible for lubrication. You soon run into the old timber plank though, straight in front of the actual cylinder casting here. And getting around the back, of course, we've got timber brake blocks on the tender.
So if you did some heavy stopping, it could smell quite interesting, I would think.
Yeah, I don't think the modern day VABs would be very impressed with timber blocks put forward for mainline operation.
So you think it's unlikely that this engine will ever see it out on the national network again?
I would very much doubt it. There are fissure cracks in the driving wheels and that sort of thing. So she's a frail old girl, and she's done work, as I say, 30 years ago, and I think probably that'll be the last time. Never say never, but I would doubt it.
Right, I can understand that. The other thing I noticed is we've got lugs on the bottom of the smoke box door. Is that because of the London North Western engine's habit of getting red hot at the front when being pushed hard?
There's absolutely no seal on that door. It's just a surface-to-surface seal. There's no sort of asbestos seal or tapered shape to seal like the Great Western LMS engines have got. So the more cleats you've got on, the more tight your door is.
I always get the impression that any major expenditure on locomotives was something that was frowned upon. They were kept as simple as possible. Is that an unfair judgment?
No, I don't think so. There's very little brass. You've got a brass nameplate on this. You won't find any brass sort of splasher detail, that sort of thing. And the old London and North Western signal boxes were really very austere.
Yeah.
Where other railways would you use brass plates? The old London and North Western used castings and just cast iron.
So a Calvinist amongst railways?
I think so.
Yes. Well, shall we have a look on the footplate and see what the control deck was like, for want of a better expression? All right, up here on the footplate we can see there's a very sparse shelter, and I don't think we could call it comfortable, but it must have been quite a sensational place to be at 90. Perhaps you could tell us something about the controls.
Yeah, I bet they were hanging on for dear life when they were tearing away for Carlisle that day, all those years ago. You've got the regulator, fairly self-explanatory in the middle here, and then a vacuum brake, which is a co-acting steam brake for the loco and tender, and then vacuum on the train, of course. You've got injector steam valves in the middle here, and this massive, impressive-looking valve is purely the shut-off for the steam heat for the train. So that goes down through a reducing valve in the corner there, a Mason valve in the corner. One water gauge, the blow down, which is quite stiff. There we are, and the shut-off valves for the 1 gauge, so similar to the Great Western in that respect. The door is of a peculiar design, designed by Webb, in that there's no actual door ring between the inner and outer wrapper. So the inner firebox wrapper is sort of peened over, bent back and then riveted through to the outer wrapper, so you get rid of the need for a fire door ring. The floor itself is an anti-slip, supposedly an anti-slip device, a massive casting, inset with about 1.25 inch oak blocks, so that when the fireman was going away for the coal and whatnot, when he sort of stepped forward to fire, it was hopefully anti-slip. Lifting injectors on the back end here, quite substantial injectors, and then right in the corner you've got a displacement lubricator with sight feeds so that the driver could see the oil going away to the cylinders. The reversing gear, no quadrant, no rack, so you didn't know what position you were in. You purely got on the go in full forward gear and then wound it back to where you needed to be for the gradient and the weight of the train. Not even anywhere to put your bottom on here. There's the vacuum, part of the vacuum train pipe there, and the sandbox lid there, so not even a space to sit down. Got good visibility straight through the faceplate here. 2 nice circular glasses straight along the boiler, so good visibility, hiding out of the way of the weather over Shap and etc. Flying along. Yeah, you've got the coal space here. They didn't care too much about the fireman. There's absolutely no fall on it. A lot of the later engines have got a fall towards the digging plate on the front of the tender, so that as you got down the heap a bit, coal was hopefully shuffling its way towards where you needed to shovel it. Another anomaly is the handbrake on a Northwestern tender. Almost everyone else has a horizontal handle leading down through the floor to an equal crank, a 90-degree crank just under the running board height, which pulls through pull rods, pulls the handbrake on. The London Northwestern, in all its wisdom, took the handbrake mechanism at 45 degrees down through the coal space and had to cover it in a mild steel cover, which of course took the sulphur and went rotten and all that sort of thing, and then they came through the bottom of the tender at a very awkward angle to pull the brake on. Why they did that, I don't know. The pull rod, the actual mechanism of that handbrake, is probably about 15 feet long, whereas it only needs to be about 4 or 5 feet.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Ray. That's been very informative.
Time eventually ran out for Webb's jumbos in the mid-1930s, with the last engine, LMS number 25001 Snowdon, being withdrawn in 1934. The little engine's success was a tribute to the simplicity and quality of Webb's design, celebrated by the preservation of the star of the class, number 790 Hardwick. Webb himself retired rather reluctantly in 1903. He left behind him a legacy of great inventions, many wonderful locomotives, and a wide-spanning, successful, and modern railway network.